So if I can, Ms Winmar, you'd be aware that the Senate is conducting an inquiry into flags of convenience vessels, and I won't go too much into it, but we did put out a report, an interim report, and the government responded to that 2 weeks ago. So I just want to ask you a couple of questions around the government's response to our report. And I want to take you to recommendation 2, 4.12, where the committee recommends that this review included a comprehensive whole-of-government assessment of the potential security risk posed by flag of convenience vessels and foreign crews. So has the OTS read these recommendations?
Yes, we have, Senator.
Okay, thank you, Ms Winmar. So you'd be well aware of the statements by Australian Border Force in their submission to the inquiry, warning of the national security vulnerabilities created in the FOC system.
Yes, Senator.
Yep, thank you. So has the OTS made any attempt to better understand the FOC system of ship deregulation, and have you done anything to counter Australian Border Force's deep concerns about the attractiveness of FOCs to terrorist and crime organisations in our domestic trade?
Senator, we are confident in Australia's current approach to maritime security. It is comprehensive and it involves a number of agencies and measures, and it's designed to apply to all vessels irrespective of flag state which enter Australian ports. So the other thing that I'd also note is that there's no information from the intelligence community at the moment to indicate any kind of specific threat of unlawful interference to Australia's maritime transport sector, and as I said before, we monitor that very closely.
I understand that, but it was only a few months ago when Captain Salas was sailing in and out of the Australian ports and no one even knew. So that's why I'm raising these issues, and you know very well my feelings here in this area. So as much as I would love, and it's 9:30 at night, so we've missed play school and all the other stuff that reports on what goes on here, without scaring the horses, we haven't got it completely right yet. Although our people in border forces are doing their darndest, we're not going to fool ourselves to think that we're on top of everything. So, has there been an assessment of the potential security risk posed by FOCs in the Australian coastal trade?
Not specifically flags of convenience, but we are, as I say, looking at the threat environment all the time and adjusting our regulatory regime.
Okay. Does the OTS receive information about ships which have been involved in criminal activities in our ports?
No, we don't. Under our legislation, we specifically have a purpose that looks at unlawful interference with maritime transport, and that in the explanatory memorandum is around security.
Can I just ask, what does adjusting your regulatory regime mean? Do you actually wait for a tip-off and then do inspections, and in the absence of a tip-off you don't do any inspections? Is that how it works?
No. So we work closely with the intelligence community, and
I understand you've said that repeatedly, but I don't really know what that means.
That's right. And so if they tell us that something has changed...
Who's they?
The intelligence community, intelligence agencies. So ASIO, for instance, is a close partner of ours.
ASIO?
That's right.
AFP?
AFP, that's right.
Border Force?
We talk with DIBP, yes, that's
and aren't
right.
they saying that they're concerned?
They did about flags of convenience, but I'm talking specifically about the threat environment. And ASIO is actually the preeminent Australian agency that looks at threat. And we
let me get this right. So Border Force have indicated flags of convenience are an issue, but they're not the preeminent source of information. ASIO is. Is that what you're telling us?
I'm saying that ASIO is concerned with the security threat environment, and that is what we are concerned with under our legislation.
And what is Border Force concerned about then, not security? What are they concerned about? People smuggling?
I can't quite remember what their submission...
Well, you're speaking with great authority, and now you can't remember what Border Force's concerns are.
Not specifically, Senator.
Well, perhaps you can take on notice what Border Force's concerns were, because you've attempted to put a position where there is no threat. We know that ASIO, AFP, Border Force, who else?
They're the primary agencies that we speak with.
So we don't listen to the international... Interpol or anybody else that's...
No, because the agencies that we deal with are looking at our...
So we know one out of the three has indicated concerns, but they're not the preeminent one.
And I'd have to go back and actually look at what their concerns were, Senator.
Okay. I just
Well,
thought,
well, I can help you. You know, they made it very, very clear that they had serious concerns about the vulnerabilities created by the FOC system. It's pretty simple. They didn't go into any detail, but that's what they said. Because the whole recommendation to 4.12 says that we should have, and this is supported by all senators, not just the opposition senators, a comprehensive whole of government assessment of the potential security risk. So we've only got one part, and it just appears by the government's response that Mickey Mouse doesn't see move along, even though border protection, immigration and border protection are concerned. It appears OTS, AFP, ASIO have no concerns. That's how it appears. It was the government's response. So
So I'm just not quite sure what the question was.
well, the question was very simple. Do you have concerns because Border Protection has identified that there are some serious security risks with FOCs?
Senator, the way I interpret what Border DIBP has talked about in terms of flags of convenience, I'm not quite sure what concerns they are referring to as they're talking about with the flags of convenience regime generally, and whether it's an immigration concern or a concern around criminality. They have a much broader mandate, obviously, than we do. And we just look at security. We take our lead from ASIO, which provides us with that guidance on the threat
Ms.
environment.
We don't expect Border Force to come out and say, here's what they can do if they want to smuggle guns or drugs or throw people overboard. We understand that, but we would. That's why we call for a recommendation for a whole of government review. So you're all part of the same
And I
team,
think
straight.
some of the issues for Border Force may well be around the operation of the maritime crew visa, for instance.
Yeah,
They're
sure.
matters on which
Absolutely,
we
yeah.
don't get involved.
No,
So they may be those types of issues which they're flagging with the committee.
No, I understand, but what I'm
So-
just asking, why isn't the whole of government is not support the whole of government review?
so what would characterise a threat from ASIO? Someone sailing into Sydney Harbour and blowing it up under the harbour bridge or something? What is ASIO going to tell you?
I wouldn't like to speculate what ASIO might do. That's obviously something for them. But the key things that they advise us on are the intent and capability of people that might have intent to do something around a terrorist threat.
Well, the most obvious intent and capability was to sail past Australia and meet up with a reasonable sized yacht out of Sydney Harbour and bring in about 50 kilos of cocaine. Do they advise you of that sort of strategy?
So, Senator, we're concerned about terrorist attacks
That's
rather
what I'm
than...
trying to define. So you're working out whether flags of convenience are a terrorist threat to Australia, and you avoid any information about smuggling or
So,
damage
Senator,
to the environment.
That information wouldn't be provided to us, Senator. Any information which intelligence agencies are collecting in relation to other illegal activities would go to those relevant agencies.
Okay.
We only receive threat assessments as they relate to threats to the transport sector.
So as I hear your evidence, you're refining your role to a very thin sliver of terrorist.
That's what our legislation is based on. And I might also mention that we receive that threat environment reporting, but our regime applies equally to anyone who wants to access a secure area at a seaport. So it's irrelevant of what vessel they come on and whether it has what flag state it has.
Okay.
So I'm just trying to reconcile the fact that you're concerned about a cocaine smuggler being employed at an airport, but you're not concerned about a cocaine smuggler being on a freedom
Bless you.
on an
If
FOC
I did that, I
boat.
would have blown my head off. I can't sneeze quite like that.
Well, we're
Sorry, I missed that.
the first part of your question. We're concerned about a person's criminal behaviour as that may provide avenues of behaviour which may lead them to be a threat to the transport system. In the second situation, other agencies such as Border Force or the police agencies are concerned about criminality in relation to drugs and narcotics.
And if I might add...
Well, wasn't there a North Korean boat that famously was sailing up and down the coast looking for a place to dock and unload 100 kilos of heroin? Yes, there was.
Yes.
And what did you think about that? Was that terrorism or was that just
Again, it was-
opportune drug smuggling?
Trade.
It was a criminal act as opposed to terrorism. If I
North
might,
Korea.
if I might add, Senator, Our regime, again, it applies regardless of what the criminality of someone might be or the security. If you are accessing a secure zone, you either need to have an M6, or you need to be continuously monitored by someone who has an M6 in a secure zone. So it's irrespective of who you are or what your intention is.
I give up.
Okay, I just want to bring you back to my line of questioning, okay? So back to our inquiry, which is still going. So it's heard about the vulnerability of foreign seafarers sourced from developing countries replacing Australian workers, which is true, on our coastal trade to the degree, I should say, that our entire domestic fuel and dangerous goods like ammonium nitrate are now only shipped by foreign flag ships. The vast majority of FOCs whose crews only require an MCV, which we're advised takes 24 to 48 hours to get. Does the OTS consider the MSIC, which can take months to get, superior to the MCV in regards to its reliability and identification of its holder?
Senator, they have two different purposes. One is an immigration check, and I can't talk to what it includes. The MSIC, though, as we've spoken about it before, it is a relatively rigorous regime, and we are trying to obviously strengthen it.
Short answer to your question is yes, we do regard the MSIC as a higher level of protection for those wishing to interfere with maritime operations, recognising that those who are on MCVs would not normally hold an MSIC and have to be escorted through any sensitive area of a port.
Yeah, I understand, Mr Murdoch. You see, but I'll go back to the good old days, me and me best thongs and going out blue singlet. And I know exactly about ammonium nitrate. And Miss Wilmar's talking about terrorism, and ammonium nitrate's not just something we can disregard, because I know how heavily policed the ammonium nitrate distribution is in our state by road. And the rigid laws around the truck, he can't leave the bucket of snot and head in for a shower. He's got to stay there with it for all sorts of obvious reasons. So I wanted to hear that the MSIC is far more rigorous, because it still brings me back that the MCV, you don't really know who all these people are like you do, whereas if they're going for an MSIC, and you can't disregard that this could be a terrorism threat.
But again,
foreign seafarers that you don't know who they are.
As Ms Wimmer indicated, the MCV is a immigration clearance process.
But if they blow the bloody thing up, Mr Murdoch, it's got nothing to do with immigration. This comes back to you, Ms Wimmer, and your mob. This could be a good talk for terrorism.
If someone has an MCV, they are still required to either be escorted in a secure area.
I know, but do not try and fob me off with foreign seafarers on MCVs, not M6, who are carting Australia's fuel supply around our nation and our dangerous goods, including ammonium nitrate. So you can't tell me this is rigid as it comes. You can't tell me that.
Well, we're certainly not trying to fob you off, Senator. We wouldn't do that.
No, some might, but I know you wouldn't, Mr Murdoch, because you know how passionate I am about this. So can you tell me, Ms Winmar, how many MCV applications have been rejected over the past 2 years?
No, sorry, I can't. That would be a question for immigration.
For immigration, okay. Immigration. Right. Can you tell me how many MCV applications have been rejected over the same period?
I don't think I can, but I can take it on notice.
And why don't you think? Is it something...
Sorry, I've got some statistics. I'm just not sure that
I'd like to share it with you, because I would like to know that if someone's been knocked back for an MSIC, it's not because they got cross eyes or a bad tattoo.
What was the period again that you were interested in?
Oh, the last 2 years. Because if you're going to get knocked back for an MSIC, it's going to be a very good reason.
Yeah, but the findings are not eligible. So in the last 2 years, so if I say the financial year 2015-16, of those MSIC applications that were completed, and we obviously do have withdrawals when perhaps extra information is sought and someone doesn't come through.
This was one of my first inquiries when I came in the Senate, I remember it vividly.
Right. 497 have been found ineligible, that's right.
Yep.
And in the financial year 2016-17, and obviously we haven't completed that financial year yet, 310 to date.
Right, thank you very much, Ms Winmar.
I could actually give you the, if you're interested in the 2014-15 financial
Yeah,
year.
yeah, throw
also.
that at me too,
So
please.
that was 619.
How many people applied?
I can give you the numbers of MSIC applications completed, if that helps. For the 14-15 financial year, 56,786.
So we're talking about 1%, are we?
We are talking about for the 2014-15 financial year, 1.09%.
Okay, thank you.
So I think, sadly, I think I know the answer, but I hope I'm wrong, Ms Winmar. So is OTS concerned that MSIC and MCV are regulated through different agencies?
No, we're not, because they have different purposes.
Not at all. I am really. But do you believe this could impact on national security if it's not the one agency doing all the checks? Bear in mind, Miss Winmar, we had Captain Salas, the admitted gun runner, who mysteriously lost. One person overboard, 2 killed, running in and out of Gladstone, and you mob, not you personally, none of you mob knew about it. It was Mr Owen Jacques, the reporter from the Sunshine Coast, who knew.
What are you going to do in that old chair?
Senator Judy Zelke, Deputy
I wonder where
Secretary.
you were. Oh, there you are. Hello.
Good evening. How are you this evening?
I can't stop laughing, Miss Selkie.
I just thought it might be helpful to offer you a document that we provided to the committee. So if you recall, on the 4th of December 2015, we had a similar conversation in relation to the role of the different pieces of legislation, whether it be an MSIC or a MCV, or the role of Border Force, for example, the role of immigration, etc., and the way in which each of them play different roles in relation to the way in which people access our shores. We provided that back in January last year. I actually find it a very helpful document to actually set out the different roles that each of those pieces of legislation play. More than happy to provide that to the Secretariat now, if you'd find that helpful to refer to.
But, you know,
Thank you.
I listened very carefully to Senator Still's line of questioning, and I understand you have different legislation, but the simple person in the street will see a ship coming down the coast, and they'll see 56,000 Australians applying for a MSIC card, 1% failure, and then they'll see the majority of shipping crewed by people who get a migration card and no security check. How does that reassure me?
But also, importantly, recognising different purposes of those two regulatory systems, but also recognising that those people with an MCV cannot operate unescorted within a port environment. They have to be escorted or under supervision at all times.
Okay. And with respect, Secretary Murdoch, I've worked for 12 years in an airport. I've worked for a number of years in a lot of the ports around Australia, and I see ship's crew coming and going, selling watches, selling tobacco freely in those places. And if you're relying on a security guard escorting a whole line of crew, I think you might need to go down and have a look till it really happens.
Well,
And my simple point remains, from a terrorist perspective, we are well guarded. 56,000 applicants, 1% who fail. The majority of ships are crewed by people who are not subject to the same level of scrutiny.
Sure.
And you can say that they're escorted in and out, but their intentions are not evaluated. Their criminal background, their history of employment is not evaluated. They're free to come and go to our coast, and the only constraint you say is they have to be escorted in and out of the port.
So, Senator, I was just going to say that in relation to this document, it also does refer to the checks that are done by our Immigration Department when an MCV is actually applied for. I'll make sure that you have that information as well.
I mean, my point would be, why don't they get a MSIC card?
So, well, it wasn't Australians doing it, but anyway,
Because they
look
wouldn't
at
get one, mate. That's
Now-
why that's why they're applying it.
Oh, okay, thanks. Beauty. So what I want to do now is just want to bring you back to a YouTube video where the International Transport Workers Federation National Coordinator, watch this, here's me mate, I actually watched it, showed me. He boarded a foreign flagged ship alongside an inner city wharf in Glebe. in Sydney. Just walked up the gangway. It was taken just over a year ago and shown to the Senate inquiry in March. That's when we saw it. So I asked them, how can anyone access a foreign-owned, foreign-flagged, foreign cruise ship in a working Australian port without any checks at all?
Senator, I think I know the video you're referring to, but I'd need to clarify. I think that the issues there were that the port was not necessarily a regulated port, and there was not necessarily a security zone in operation at the time that that vessel.
So Glebe
That's right.
in Sydney is not a regulated port.
I'd have to go
This is
back and
getting
check,
worse.
but from recollection,
No,
it isn't.
let us take that on notice, Senator. I don't know. I'm not familiar with the YouTube video. We will go and review it and come back to you with advice in relation to access to that vessel.
And how anyone can just climb on a foreign flagged.
Did that person have an MSIC?
He probably has got an MSIC, but it wasn't
And
shown. He's filmed all the
did-
way. He's
did he-
filmed in his car, driving
Did he
up
get
there.
access to the vessel by virtue of his ITF role?
I don't know. No, there was no one around. When the video we saw, he showed the committee. Right time.
Although he would, if it's the video I'm thinking about, he was actually welcomed on board by the captain,
Yeah, so.
who may have known him and known whether he had an MSIC or not.
That's why I questioned whether he was there.
Go for it, please, and you can come back and tell us.
We'll review it and
Have you
come
tried
back.
fishing on them? Have you tried going down Freo with your hand line and a couple of muleys? Jesus, they pounce on you like you've got no idea.
If the video highlights any deficiencies in the regime, we'll take action on those matters.
Oh, great. Okay, so does anyone ever check those foreign crews during their 9-month contract, over which time they never leave the Australian coast? Or is it just all done over computer?
That's not
that-
an
Immigration?
Yes, that's
So that would be
immigration.
Border Force.
Yep, okay. Border Force, yep, same thing. Okay. Can you tell me how many of our ports in Australia have no physical barriers or security checks to the ship's gangway?
Senator, so I think we've had the conversation possibly before about secure zones can actually
Sure,
be
yeah.
ephemeral, that they may apply when a ship's in the port, but then not apply. So they can be they basically aren't there permanently. So it's very hard to say where there is a secure zone and where there is not a secure zone that might be actually managing access to that vessel.
So is it fair to say that there are some ports that aren't regulated, so evildoers could just slip into that port?
There are certainly ports that we don't regulate every port, that's right.
Is there some ports we only regulate some berths? I
There-
didn't know this.
There are certainly, and Richard, help me out if I'm...
Senator,
get it wrong.
it'll depend on the operations of the port. There will be some ports who will have permanent zones established with the ship-to-shore interface. There will be some ports where the zones will be turned on depending on the arrival and departure patterns of vessels. There are other ports, as Ms Wimmer has said, that are not security regulated ports. So it really depends on the operation of the port and the type and the frequency of traffic which is coming in and out of that port.
So what about Glebe? Is that a regulated port?
We'd have to take that one on notice and get back to you.
Ooh, okie dokie. All right, so in relation to the government's response to the RATS Committee's interim report to FOCs, I'm now going to ask, have you read the government's response to the at all, or any parts of it, the flag of convenience shipping produced by this committee? I know
Yes.
you have. You've read it all. Okay. So we endorsed 10 recommendations for the government to consider in the report. The government in its response rejected 6 of the recommendations and just noted the remaining 4. So the first recommendation, that the Commonwealth undertakes a review of Australia's maritime sector, is met with the following response from the government. Another view is unlikely to change the current decline of the Australian shipping industry. Do you agree with that statement?
Senator, that's outside of my mandate.
They don't need help. Now this is serious stuff. This is really serious stuff. They don't need covering. They should be able to sit there. This is Australian national security. You mob couldn't wait to go to every election screaming about foreigners coming down here, blowing us up or doing whatever. So I don't expect you to start protecting their backside. We've worked together too closely these years, and that's very poor judgment. At 9 o'clock at night, very poor judgment. And I don't expect that from colleagues that I've worked closely with, no matter who's in government.
I think that it's probably a question more appropriately directed to the government, to the Minister.
Okay, Minister, do you agree with that? You couldn't wait to be part of the government that was threatening us about what the Muslims are going to do.
Enough commentary.
There's plenty of commentary. And
No, I'm
that
really
was
going to hang on
opinion-
this because...
That
see,
was
I've-
opinion, Senator Sterle, and I'm very happy to take that on notice through the
Oh,
Minister
yeah,
for
all
you.
right. Look,
Go
I'll
on,
tell you
Senator
what.
Sterle, you know I'm not the
I
Minister
have been
responsible
wound
in
up
this area,
enough
and
by
I'm
those
very-
clowns from CASA, so
I'm
I'll
very,
let you off
very
there.
happy to accommodate you, Senator Sterle, and of course I will do that for you.
I just don't need any more rubbing up after the insult from that mob from CASA, because they're not CASA. Yeah,
It's
who
getting
was it?
late.
Yeah, CASA, that mob.
Blame him.
Pack of fools.
Senator Sterle.
Anyway, do you agree with what I just said, with that response?
Look, that's a statement of the government's position. That's not something that we as officials can comment on.
So in their submission to the inquiry, Australian Border Force made this startling declaration. The department notes that while a significant proportion of legitimate sea trade is conducted by ships with FOC registration, there is features of FOC registration, regulation and practice that organised crime syndicates or terrorist groups may seek to exploit. And they go further to say these features are a lack of transparency of the identity of ship owners, no argument from me, and consequent impediment to holding the owner to account for the ship's actions, and insufficient flag state regulator enforcement and adherence to standards. Given the severity of Australian Border Force's concerns, would you agree with that? We need to continue looking at this issue until those concerns are negated. It's not a matter of opinion.
Given the strength of what you outlined, Australian Border Force views, I'm sure they will continue to look at those issues.
Thank you. I'll go to recommendation 5. Have you got it in front of you? Saves me reading it all.
Yes, I've got
Well,
it.
let's go to recommendation 5, okay? That's easier. So would it be fair to say that foreign seafarers on FOC vessels are in a position to complain about their pay and conditions while in Australian waters? I was being preached to earlier about the ILO conventions and all that sort of stuff. I'm sorry, I just thought you got recommendation 5 in front of you.
I've got it in front of me, Senator. Sorry, your
Oh, it's
question.
not fair. I didn't give you an opportunity to read it.
I've read it.
Oh, okay. What do you reckon then? Mr. Murdoch?
Well, there are provisions there, and we know there are situations either through port state control inspections or through issues that are brought to the attention of Fair Work, where crew remuneration has been highlighted and brought to attention.
So foreign seafarers.
Foreign seafarers.
So does the government have the capacity to ensure the welfare of seafarers once they leave our shores?
Well, clearly Australia's capacity is in relation to our port state control and the application of Australian laws.
Yeah, it's a loaded question because I know the answer, Mr. Murdoch. So we don't.
But that's what I've indicated in my very public servant way.
Well, now you've all upset me. I don't want to ask any more questions.
Thank the Lord. Senator
A long time.
Mr. Chair, now, Ms. Rinmer, I just wonder, do you have an MSIC or have you ever applied for one?
No, I don't have an AMSIC, but I have an ASIC.
Mr. Farmer,
Senator, I have an ASIC.
MSIC?
No,
Don't
Senator.
disrupt me while I'm building caveats here.
Ms. Zelke, have you ever applied for an MSIC?
No, Senator, I've been escorted each time I've been in a port with
Secretary?
a secure area.
No, I similarly have had an ASIC, but not an MSIC.
So, can I ask the three of you, have you ever been onto a port?
That's where my best
Yes,
No,
Senator.
Senator.
And were you quizzed, or was the person who held the MSIC quizzed at the point of entry as to who you were?
Senator, in my situation, I actually had to fill out paperwork before, in the days before attending the port, so that it could actually be cleared by the port security before I arrived, and then I was signed on to be able to access the port. That's 3 different ports that I've had that situation.
Senator, my experience has been that I've normally been with a port operator who is expecting me. So I've not had any of that issue.
Same,
Pre-managed.
same, Senator, but on entering the zone, I was, or the person escorting me was questioned by the security guard as to why I was coming into the zone.
So I had an MSIC for 18 months. I can't think how much it cost me, $380 I think, for the port of Fremantle. I wasn't eligible to go to any other port. And never once was anyone ever at a gate to quiz me. As it happened, I never took anybody else into the port of Fremantle with me, but I certainly went in on many occasions before I paid my $300 and whatever, and at no time have I ever been quizzed by anybody, a security guard or anybody else. either before I held an MSIC in the company of someone who did, or when I had a person or people with me who were there as my guests. I've never ever in the Port of Fremantle been quizzed, which causes me to ask the question, it's so wide open, isn't it, that it defies any value in terms of security because nobody, in my case, either as a guest of an MSIC holder or as an MSIC holder with guests, ever challenged me.
Senator, if I might refer back to the conversation we had about maritime security zones. MSICs only relate to maritime security zones.
Correct.
And maritime security zones don't necessarily cover the entire port.
Well, I can assure you when there's a livestock carrier in and there are all sorts of... Sorry?
That's to stop Senator Rice attacking you.
Well, when there's all sorts of people in and around or wanting to get around the port, I can assure you that certainly is an area of, let's call it a protective zone.
And so the way our legislation works, which it does establish maritime security zones. They are requested by the industry participant that we regulate as to where they will be established and when they will be established. And if they've made a judgment that at particular times they don't need one, there won't be any MSIC controls around access to any areas at the port.
So is it always the case that the application process and the scrutiny process is outsourced from your department?
Sorry, I'm not quite sure I understand.
Well, I had to apply to the Fremantle Port Authority.
Yes, that's right. So the issuing bodies for MSIC cards are commercial bodies, or they are, say, a port or an airport. The actual background checking process, though, is undertaken within government, and all of those issuing bodies, which is how we term them, they actually work with Auscheck in the Attorney General's Department, and they basically, as soon as the background check is cleared, good to go, they issue the card on that basis. And we manage compliance by those issuing bodies with regulations to make sure that they're protecting cards, issuing cards in the right way, and keeping records.
Now, are there instances in which the department, through the issuing body, have refused cards, but that has been overruled? And if so, by what process can that be overruled? If the background check comes back and the card is not, the person is not eligible to hold a card, right,
they can apply to the department for a card in a discretionary review.
Yes.
And the department basically does a review of their situation, and then we make a decision about whether they should receive a card on that basis. There is an appeals process. They can go to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, and in cases, yes, we have been overturned by the AAT on our decisions not to issue a card.
And can you give us any explanations as to why the Administrative Appeals Tribunal would overrule what is obviously a very comprehensive process?
Senator, as we discussed earlier, the AAT looks very narrowly at the purpose in the Maritime Maritime Security. Sorry, now I'm getting my acronym wrong. Sorry, Maritime Transport Security and Offshore Facilities Act purpose, and they specifically have specifically noted in cases that discretion must be exercised in accordance with the language by which it is conferred and to achieve the purposes for which the power has been granted, and they have taken a very narrow interpretation of the purpose. And if they
have taken a narrow interpretation, have you as the department recommended to government that there should be a tightening of that legislation to close that loophole?
Senator, yes, we have, and there is a piece of legislation that should be introduced in the Senate in the June sittings to deal with that.
Excellent. We'll watch that with interest. I've got to say to you, Minister, it took me some time before my application was approved, which I can't possibly believe there would have been any hold-up, but there may well have been. What did impress me was on the anniversary of the date in which it expired, since I wasn't willing to pay another $375, I was obliged on that day to actually yield up the card. I also have asked questions before in this place about why it's not possible for people like ourselves who might want to visit a number of ports, as I might want to do in the connection, for example, with live export trade, as to why I couldn't be given a multiple port entry. So, Secretary, that's something you might take up. Totally